There's a place where the war doesn't look like a war. No explosions, no front lines, no dramatic speeches, just cold water, silent submarines, and cables running across the ocean floor that, if they go dark, half of Europe feels it within minutes. That place is Norway. And right now, a lot of very serious people are paying very uncomfortable attention to it. Because Norway isn't just another peaceful Nordic country with expensive coffee, electric cars, and people who somehow treat minus 10 degrees like it's a bit fresh. It's sitting on something far more dangerous: access, control, and a front row seat to Russia's most important military playground. Which means if anything goes wrong in Northern Europe, Norway doesn't get dragged into the conflict. It's already part of it. But there is a reason Oslo is suddenly moving with such urgency. Behind the scenes, the quiet game of influence is being replaced by something much more pointed. They've already been trying to shape what happens next, quietly. Norway's own security services don't talk about enemies publicly. They call them threats. It sounds polite, almost diplomatic, like something you'd hear in a government report nobody reads. But when you actually look at those reports, especially the Norwegian Police Security Service and intelligence assessments going into 2026, the language gets very specific very quickly. State actors, named ones. And at the top of that list, there's one country that keeps showing up: Russia. Not as a theoretical risk, not as a future possibility, as the main problem right now. Up in the high north, Norway shares a border with Russia that most people forget even exists. It's short, quiet, and looks almost irrelevant on a map until you zoom out. Because just across that border sits the core of Russia's northern military power, the Northern Fleet. We're talking about ballistic missile submarines, long-range strike capabilities, and a force designed specifically to project power into the Arctic and North Atlantic. This is where Russia's second strike nuclear capability is protected. And Norway is right next to it, not observing from a distance, right there, listening, tracking, logging movement patterns most of Europe never even hears about. Which means in any real escalation, Norway isn't a secondary player. It's one of the first places Russia has to deal with, not because Norway is trying to be aggressive, because geographically it's unavoidable. That alone would be enough to create tension. But what's been happening over the last few years isn't about open confrontation. It's been something else entirely: espionage, cyber operations, preparation for sabotage. Not dramatic enough to trend on social media, but very visible inside intelligence briefings. Norwegian authorities have already warned that Russian intelligence activity is expected to increase through 2026, with a focus on military targets, NATO coordination, and Norway's role in supporting Ukraine. And this isn't just abstract. Back in 2022, a man named Mikhail Mikushin was arrested in Norway posing as a Brazilian academic. He had built a full identity, entered research environments, and was later identified as a Russian intelligence officer. That wasn't a movie plot. That was Oslo. That's the level of patience we're talking about. And this isn't just a concern for the people in suits. In early 2026, the reality of this threat landed in 13,000 Norwegian mailboxes. The military started sending out official notices, not draft cards, but property requisitions. It told ordinary citizens that in the event of a crisis, the government has the right to take their boats, their cars, and even their homes for national defense. It was a cold paper reminder that the most peaceful country in the world is now operating on a wartime playbook. They aren't waiting for the emergency to happen. They're pre-ordering the resources to survive it. So this isn't about tanks crossing borders. It's about systems being mapped, access being built, and positions being prepared in advance. That level of patience is exactly what makes the situation so volatile. Because once those systems are mapped and those positions are prepared, the invisible war moves from the shadows and onto the map. Pull up a map and do the thing everyone does with Norway. You stare at it for 5 seconds, you nod like you understand it, and then you quietly admit you only recognize it because it looks like a dragon trying to escape the ocean. That shape is the whole story. Norway isn't dangerous because it's loud. Norway's dangerous because it's placed like a door frame. Russia's northern forces don't get to magically teleport into the Atlantic. They have to move through real water, past real coastlines, under real sensors, and the minute they do, somebody has to notice. Norway sits next to the lanes that matter, which means in a crisis, it doesn't have to win the ocean. It just has to make the ocean inconvenient, because at the end of the day, geography is the one thing you can't sanction, bribe, or spin in a press conference. It is a physical reality that Moscow has to deal with every time a hull leaves the dock. Then the Arctic adds gasoline to the whole situation. The ice isn't behaving like it used to, and you don't need to be a climate scientist to notice it. The shipping calendar is changing. Routes up north open longer. Logistics planners start smiling in spreadsheets. And suddenly the idea of moving between Europe and Asia without the usual choke points stops sounding like a fantasy and starts sounding like a plan. Money starts sniffing around first. Strategy shows up right after. This puts a massive veto power in Norway's hands. As the Arctic opens up, Norway becomes the nearest steady NATO edge to the world's newest trade lane. And whoever lives next to the lane gets a vote on how safe it feels. Now zoom further north and you hit the weirdest part of the story. Svalbard. Most people hear Svalbard and think it's either a metal band or an IKEA lamp. It's neither. It's a treaty zone with Norwegian sovereignty and rules that let other countries operate there under specific conditions. That sounds boring until you realize what it creates. A shared space in the high north where everyone watches everyone and everyone pretends they're not watching. Russia keeps a permanent footprint there through its settlement in Barentsburg. It's small, it's constant, and it's politically useful in a way that drives planners insane because it's a reminder that the Arctic isn't just empty white space. It's lived in, legally complicated, and emotionally loaded. When tension rises elsewhere, Svalbard doesn't need a war to become messy. It just needs somebody to push the rules and wait to see who flinches. It is a masterclass in gray zone friction. Svalbard is a pressure point designed to create diplomatic drama without ever firing a shot, and Oslo is currently making that play much more difficult to run. Then comes the part that sounds boring right up until it ruins your week. The stuff under the water. The seabed around Norway isn't just mud and cold fish. It's cables, pipelines, and infrastructure that keep modern life stitched together. People love talking about aircraft carriers because they look cool on TV. Undersea cables are the opposite. They're silent, fragile, and they don't generate a single heroic photo. They also carry the kind of data that makes countries function like countries. Europe doesn't have to imagine what undersea pressure looks like anymore. The Baltic Connector gas pipeline between Finland and Estonia was damaged in October 2023, and investigators tied it to an anchor drag from the container ship New Polar Bear. That incident wasn't in Norway's backyard, but it was close enough to make every serious security person in the region stop pretending the seabed is boring. If you can damage a pipeline and cables with something as low-tech as an anchor, you don't need a sci-fi weapon. You need opportunity. The message was received loud and clear in Oslo. After the Baltic Connector hit, Norway stopped treating the seabed as a blind spot and started treating it as a front line. And this isn't theory. When kilometers of undersea sensor cable simply vanished off the coast of Vesterålen, it wasn't a fishing accident. It was a message. And in 2026, Norway is making sure that message can't be sent again. If you think vanishing cable sounds like a grandpa story that ends with, "and then we walked uphill both ways," that's fair, except this cable weighed tons and didn't grow legs. So Norway started leaning into the one advantage it can always cash in. It can watch, not with binoculars and vibes, with hardware. Norway isn't just watching with binoculars. Their fleet of P-8 Poseidons, the world's premier submarine hunting aircraft, operates out of Evins and works the high north like a giant moving sensor platform. In 2026, a Russian Akula-class submarine can't sneeze in the Barents Sea without somebody logging the decibel level. That's not poetry. That's the entire point of buying the plane. The result is simple and deeply annoying for anyone trying to operate quietly. Movement gets noticed sooner. Patterns get mapped faster. Normal activity starts looking less normal once it's tracked for months. It's a total loss of stealth for the Northern Fleet. The sea doesn't get bigger just because you want it to be, and Norway is turning the high north into a place where sneaky plans age badly. But that pressure doesn't stay offshore. Once you tighten the grip on the water, the next move goes inland, into the networks and systems where nobody sees the attack coming until the lights flicker. In 2026, the scary part isn't a submarine you can track, it's a login prompt you can't. Norway's enemies won't like this video because Norway is built like a modern control room. Digital systems tied into real-world levers, and those levers matter more up here than people realize. The Norwegian Police Security Service and the Intelligence Service have been blunt in their annual assessments and focus reports through 2024 into 2026. Hostile state activity is aimed at intelligence collection, cyber access, and groundwork that can turn into sabotage when the timing is right. Here's the mechanism. You don't need to break into Norway by force when you can stroll in through a contractor's inbox. Supply chains do the dirty work. One vendor gets popped, one update gets poisoned, one admin account gets reused, and suddenly the target isn't a bunker with guards. It's an ordinary workstation in an ordinary building that happens to touch something critical. The answer is what Norway has been doing quietly while the internet argues about nonsense, tightening the boring stuff, network segmentation, background checks that actually mean something, exercises that treat IT incident like national security incident, because that's what it becomes the second it hits energy, ports, or defense logistics. This is the death of easy access. The old routes relied on Norwegian complacency, but in the current climate, that is a luxury Oslo can no longer afford. Now the pressure shifts from machines to people, because people still have the most convenient ports. This is where the Mikution case matters, not as gossip, as proof of method. In 2022, Norway arrested Mikael Mikution, who was living under a Brazilian cover identity while operating in a research environment in the north. That wasn't a tourist with a weird hobby. That was a long-billed access play, the kind you run when you plan to be around for a while. The answer is counterintelligence that stops treating friendly curiosity as harmless. Vetting gets sharper. Research partnerships get more scrutiny. Access is narrowed. It's a fundamental shift in posture. Norway has stopped assuming the quiet guy at the research conference is there for the science. They've realized that polite manners don't have to mean an open door. Then comes the mechanism that doesn't target systems or secrets. It targets timing. Influence operations aim for the moment where a government needs clarity and gets fog instead. The language in Norwegian assessments over the last few years has kept circling the same point in different ways. Foreign actors push narratives to weaken trust, to create friction, to slow decision-making around NATO, Ukraine support, and security policy. That's the whole game. Delay is victory in disguise. To fight a war that moves this fast, you can't rely on human reaction times. That's why in 2026, Norway stood up its first dedicated AI military center. They've invested billions into a system that can sift through billions of data points, from satellite imagery of the Kola Peninsula to tiny fluctuations in undersea power grids, to spot an attack before it even starts. The goal isn't just to respond to sabotage, it's to predict it. They're building a digital brain that can see the patterns in the chaos, turning the high north into a place where an adversary's move is countered before the order is even finished being typed. The answer is a mix of public resilience and institutional muscle. Norway leans on transparency, stronger media literacy work, and blunt public warnings from agencies that normally write like they're allergic to adjectives. Norway's enemies won't like this video because it's hard to run a confidence trick in a country where officials will go on record and say, in effect, yes, we see you doing that. But Norway isn't standing on this doorframe alone anymore. For decades, being the only NATO member in the high north was a lonely, exposed job. Then the map changed. With Finland and Sweden officially in the fold, the Nordic bastion has moved from a strategist's dream to a 2026 reality. This changes the math for Russia's northern fleet. Before, they only had to worry about a thin strip of Norwegian coast. Now they are facing a unified wall of intelligence and firepower, stretching from the North Sea to the Baltic. When Norway sees a threat now, they don't just call Brussels. They're sharing real-time target data with Finnish artillery and Swedish submarines. It's no longer about one country holding a door. It's about an entire peninsula turning into a fortress that Russia simply doesn't have the resources to bypass. And it's not just Moscow. In late 2025 and into 2026, the pressure has become a multi-front game, targeting everything from digital infrastructure to energy security. But here is the move that turns the table: the F-35 cloud. Norway has more F-35s per capita than almost anyone, and these aren't just jets. They are flying supercomputers. In 2026, they are being integrated into a shared NATO Arctic Sentry data link. It means that a sensor in a fjord, a P-8 over the water, and an F-35 in the air are all sharing one single crystal clear map. The gray zone, that place where adversaries like to hide, is being hit with a high-powered spotlight. Norway didn't get louder. They didn't start pounding their chests. They just understood that in 2026, safe distance is a myth. By tightening the ports, hardening the servers, and blanketing the Arctic in this high-end sensor web, they've turned the dragon from a target into a gatekeeper. Russia can keep building its northern fleet, and China can keep eyeing those trade routes. But they're finding out the hard way that the door to the north just got a lot more difficult to kick in. They'll notice the change eventually, usually right when their plans stop working. And by then, it's already too late. If you enjoyed this video and want to know more about the world's military powers, military advancements, and geopolitical tensions happening around the world, hit that like and subscribe button, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to keep up with educational videos just like this one.